The war that erupted in late February 2026, with Iran on one side and Israel and the United States on the other, may have shocked many observers around the world. However, the conflict did not emerge suddenly. Instead, it was the result of years of tension, mistrust, and geopolitical rivalry that had been steadily building across the Middle East. Relations between Iran and Israel have been hostile for decades, while the United States has long played a major military and political role in the region. By the mid-2020s, these tensions had reached a point where many analysts believed that a larger confrontation was becoming increasingly possible. One of the key issues fueling the conflict was Iran's nuclear program. Iranian officials maintained that their nuclear activities were intended for civilian purposes, such as energy production and scientific research. However, Israel and several Western governments argued that the program could potentially allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. Israel, in particular, viewed the possibility of a nuclear-armed Iran as a direct threat to its national security. Israeli leaders repeatedly stated that they would not allow Iran to acquire such weapons under any circumstances. For years, diplomatic efforts attempted to resolve the dispute. Agreements were negotiated, signed, and later abandoned. Negotiations often broke down over disagreements regarding sanctions, regional security concerns, and mechanisms to verify compliance with nuclear restrictions. During this period, the conflict between Iran and Israel increasingly took place indirectly rather than through open warfare. Cyber attacks, intelligence operations, and targeted strikes against facilities linked to Iran's military and nuclear programs became common features of this shadow conflict. The rivalry also extended through regional alliances. Iran developed strong relationships with several armed groups in the Middle East, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and various militias operating in Iraq and Syria. Iranian officials described these groups as partners in a regional alliance, while Israel and the United States viewed them as Iranian proxies that expanded Tehran's influence throughout the region. Meanwhile, Israel conducted repeated military operations against Iranian-linked targets in Syria and other areas. Exchanges of rocket fire and drone attacks occasionally occurred between Israel and groups associated with Iran, with both sides accusing each other of preparing for a larger confrontation. Inside Iran, the government was also facing significant economic pressure. International sanctions imposed over Iran's nuclear program and regional activities had placed heavy strain on the country's economy. This pressure contributed to periods of domestic protest and political tension. By the beginning of 2026, the Middle East was already in a fragile and unstable security environment. Military forces across the region were on high alert, and governments worldwide were closely monitoring the escalating standoff between Iran, Israel, and the United States. Given this tense atmosphere, some observers believed that a major escalation was becoming increasingly difficult to avoid. Welcome to Wars of the World. Reports indicated that on February 28, the United States and Israel carried out coordinated strikes on several locations in Iran following a directive attributed to U.S. President Donald Trump. Israel referred to the campaign as Operation Roaring Lion, while the United States called its participation Operation Epic Fury. The attacks began early on a Saturday morning at approximately 9:45 a.m., which is considered the first working day of the week in Iran. The primary targets included Iranian missile bases, military command centers, government buildings, and infrastructure connected to nuclear development. Several major cities were struck, including Tehran, Isfahan, Kermanshah, and Karaj. The operation involved a combination of U.S. missiles, drones, Israeli fighter jets, and newly deployed low-cost one-way attack drones. Some of these drone systems were reportedly being used in combat for the first time. One of the most significant targets was the Pasteur Street district in Tehran, where the Iranian supreme leader typically resided. The area also houses the presidential complex and the offices of Iran's National Security Council. Early reports indicated that multiple missiles struck the district during the initial phase of the operation. The Israeli Air Force later stated that it had targeted approximately 500 military sites across western and central Iran, focusing on missile launch facilities and air defense systems. Nearly 200 fighter jets were reportedly involved in the strikes. According to Israeli military sources, the first 24 hours of the campaign saw more than 1,200 bombs dropped across various strategic locations. Iranian naval assets were also targeted during the operation. Among the weapons reportedly used was the newly developed Black Sparrow air-launched ballistic missile, deployed from Israeli F-15 fighter jets. In addition to the physical attacks, Israel also carried out cyber operations targeting Iranian infrastructure, media networks, and mobile applications. One widely used application, the Badi Saba calendar and prayer app downloaded by millions of Iranian users, was reportedly compromised. Push notifications were sent in Persian, encouraging citizens and military personnel to oppose the government. Following the initial strikes, Israel declared a nationwide state of emergency amid fears of retaliation from Iran. Warning sirens were activated across the country, and citizens were advised to remain close to protected shelters. Hospitals in Israel began relocating certain operations to underground facilities as a precaution. Shortly after the attacks, reports emerged that Iran's supreme leader had been killed in the strike on Tehran. Iranian state television later confirmed his death, stating that he had been killed while inside his office. Following the initial wave of attacks, both President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released video statements defending the operation. They stated that the strikes were intended to remove what they described as a major security threat. Iran responded quickly. Within hours, Iranian forces launched a retaliatory campaign known as Operation True Promise 4. Missiles were fired toward Israel, striking several major cities including Tel Aviv and Haifa. Over the following days, additional waves of missile and drone attacks were launched. While Israel's air defense systems intercepted many of the incoming projectiles, some missiles managed to reach urban areas, causing casualties and damage. Iran also targeted a number of strategic locations across the Persian Gulf region, including sites connected to U.S. military forces stationed in Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The escalation quickly spread beyond direct military targets. Airports, ports, and other key infrastructure across parts of the Gulf region experienced disruptions, creating concerns about civilian safety and international shipping. The situation intensified further when Iran announced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important energy shipping routes in the world. The closure caused immediate disruption to global oil supplies and triggered a sharp increase in international energy prices. The conflict also drew reactions from across the world. Many Western allies of the United States expressed support for the view that Iran's military and nuclear activities represented a serious security concern. However, even among these governments, leaders stressed the importance of preventing the conflict from expanding into a wider regional war. Other countries, including Russia and China, criticized the strikes and called for an immediate ceasefire and renewed diplomatic negotiations. Across Europe, governments responded cautiously, emphasizing the need for de-escalation and dialogue. In the Middle East, reactions were particularly complex. Several Gulf states expressed concern that the conflict could spread and threaten their own territories, especially since some host U.S. military bases or vital energy infrastructure. Countries such as Turkey and Egypt also warned that prolonged fighting could destabilize the entire region. Within just 72 hours, what began as a sudden airstrike had escalated into a multi-country regional conflict. Civilians on all sides quickly felt the consequences of the war. Missile attacks, airstrikes, and infrastructure damage created growing humanitarian concerns. The economic impact was also significant. Disruptions to energy supplies and shipping routes pushed global oil and gas prices higher, affecting markets around the world. As the conflict continues, military analysts remain divided over the long-term strategic balance. Some believe the initial strikes weakened key components of Iran's military infrastructure, while others argue that Iran still possesses significant capabilities for sustained retaliation. Political leaders have also offered differing predictions about how long the conflict might last. Israeli officials have suggested the fighting could continue for weeks or even months, while Iranian leaders have pledged to resist for as long as necessary. For now, the outcome of the war remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that the events of 2026 have already become one of the most significant conflicts of the decade, with consequences that may shape the Middle East and the wider world for years to come.